The lantern's flame wavered against rotting beams, shadows shivering across the collapsed plantation house. Soldiers clearing the ruins in 1864 found him, Colonel Ambrose Harlan. His jaw snapped wide open, frozen as though mid-scream. His wife was gone, not buried, not escaped, gone. And above his bed, nailed into the beams of the attic, were 7 rusted collars. Each bore initials that never appeared in the plantation ledgers. No explanation was ever given. No one wanted one. This is not folklore, not a ghost story whispered to frightened children. It is a record of what happens when power feeds upon flesh, when faith is corrupted into ritual, when silence itself becomes inheritance. For over a century, the Harlan dynasty controlled these lands along the Mississippi. But in one night, one pact, it came undone. Tonight, we exhume the secret. Tonight, we speak aloud the vow that destroyed them. The womb is the vessel. The vessel is the key. Through her, we break the chain of death. Colonel Ambrose Harlan was born in 1807, heir to wealth and cruelty. Accounts describe him as a man who punished beyond the norms of his age, who carried himself less like a planter than a warlord. Yet cruelty was only the surface. His journals, scattered fragments, many burned, speak of a deeper obsession. He studied Jesuit exorcisms, not to drive spirits out, but to understand how to keep them tethered. He wrote of binding the unseen to the flesh of the enslaved. Neighbors called him unyielding, rigid, a man who believed even God himself owed him tribute. But the archive suggests something stranger, a hunger to outwit death itself. He did not merely want land, he wanted eternity, rooted in human blood. In 1843, Harlan gathered 7 enslaved men from his fields. He led them not to the gallows nor the whip, but into his parlor. There, under lamplight, he drew up a contract, not in ink but in blood. In exchange for their silence and service, they would one day be free. But the offering he gave them was not money, not land. He offered them his wife, not for lust, not for mercy, for something else, something ritual. Eleanor Harlan had been a belle of Virginia society, bred for grace and obedience. But life beside Ambrose hollowed her. Neighbors noticed she rarely smiled, her voice muted even at church. When the pact was made, her silence deepened. Servants whispered of her wandering barefoot through the slave quarters, hair undone, humming songs she could not have known. Melodies without origin, yet heavy with rhythm and grief. One former housemaid, interviewed decades later, swore Eleanor's eyes changed in those years. Once a soft blue, then clouded gray like storm water. She spoke of Eleanor laughing at night alone in the garden, her hands pressed against the soil, whispering as though to children no one else could see. By 1851, she vanished entirely. Ambrose told neighbors she had gone to Louisiana for her health. But no letters came. No grave was ever marked. Still, gray-eyed children began appearing across the county, born of enslaved women yet carrying features no one could explain. They were hushed, their births unrecorded. Some died in infancy. Others wandered into forests and returned with scratches too deep to be made by branches. The county whispered them into silence. But the colonel wrote, "The vessel is not lost. She multiplies." The children were never listed in church records, never baptized. They lived at the edges of fields, avoided by other children, watched with dread. Some were mute, others spoke in tongues unknown. Many sang the same eerie chants Eleanor once hummed. A midwife recounted a birth in 1853, a child with gray eyes who did not cry, but instead opened its mouth in a low hum that shook the walls. The infant died 3 nights later. The mother claimed the colonel buried it not in the slave cemetery, but beneath the floor of his house. Those who survived past infancy bore strange marks, scratches along the ribs, circular scars on their shoulders. Some claimed the children disappeared into the woods for days, returning with animal bones in their pockets. Hunters swore they saw them walking in groups of 7, silent, barefoot, faces turned toward the moon. By the time war reached Mississippi, the Harlan estate had become a place of dread. Soldiers bivouacked nearby reported nightmares, waking to find themselves covered in mud, their boots placed in circles around their beds. And when they stormed the colonel's house in 1864, they found him dead, jaw torn open, and the collars above his bed. But neither Eleanor nor the children were ever found. Nearly 30 years later, in 1892, a Jesuit priest cataloging forgotten parish records stumbled upon fragments of Harlan's pact. The language was familiar yet wrong, phrases resembling exorcism prayers but inverted. Where the liturgy cast out the unclean, Harlan's words bound it closer. The archivist described the contract as a reversed mass, a marriage of flesh and shadow. Weeks after writing his notes, he was institutionalized, raving that children born without souls walked beside his bed at night. When his papers were reviewed by colleagues, they too fell into silence. The records were sealed, hidden in a drawer of the seminary library. But rumor spread. Priests whispered of a bloodline corrupted, of a woman turned into a vessel, of 7 men who vanished into dust. By the early 20th century, the Harlan name was quietly erased from county history. Plantations sold under new titles, archives burned in unexplained fires. But in neighboring towns, children with gray eyes continued to appear. Families buried them quickly, ashamed, afraid. The archivist's final note, scrawled before his collapse, reads, "The vessel remains. The chain is not broken. It is waiting." The Civil War tore through Mississippi, but the Harlan estate seemed cursed long before Union boots crossed its fields. Witnesses spoke of a silence heavier than cannon fire, a silence that made soldiers uneasy. Campfires burned low, voices hushed, as if even laughter was forbidden near the plantation. When Colonel Harlan's body was discovered, his jaw grotesquely unhinged, the soldiers also uncovered the 7 collars nailed above his bed. No documents explained their presence. No names matched. And when attempts were made to question the enslaved community, they too were gone. Some said they escaped under cover of night. Others claimed they were taken. The war consumed the South, but the Harlan name consumed itself. By the war's end, no direct heir remained. Records vanish. Land was auctioned quietly, often to outsiders. Neighbors told investigators that family ended before the war ever did. Yet rumors persisted of Eleanor's gray-eyed children wandering the riverbanks. Hunters claimed to see them standing in shallow water, eyes reflecting moonlight though no stars shone above. None approached. None dared. The dynasty had collapsed, but the pact lived on. In 1892, a Jesuit archivist cataloging burned parish files stumbled across fragments of the Harlan contract. His handwriting trembles in the margins. Not exorcism, invitation. He reversed the sacrament. The contract mirrored church liturgy line by line, but each command was inverted. Where the Mass sanctifies the body, Harlan's pact desecrated it. Where communion symbolizes salvation, his words promised binding in flesh, breaking the chain of death. The archivist called it a liturgical inversion, a counterfeit scripture. He sent his findings to superiors. Weeks later, he was committed to an asylum, repeating the phrase, "Children born without souls." His colleagues, disturbed, locked the papers in a hidden drawer. When revisited years later, a young priest described the text as a dark mirror of God's table. He resigned from his position shortly after and was never heard from again. By the turn of the century, whispers of the Harlans became ecclesiastical rumor. Priests muttered of a family who had wed flesh to shadow, of a wife who became vessel, of descendants who carried something other than blood. The church buried the papers, but the story lingered. At the dawn of the 20th century, orphanages in Mississippi and Louisiana began to burn. Fires consumed wooden halls in minutes, leaving children's bodies charred beyond recognition. In 3 separate cases, survivors told the same story. Gray-eyed children walking into the flames, unflinching, silent. Officials blamed faulty stoves, careless candles. But nurses whispered they had seen the gray-eyed children humming strange hymns at night, melodies with no words vibrating like echoes in bone. In Natchez, an orphanage matron swore she saw one boy place his hand against a wall, and the wood blackened under his touch. The building burned 2 nights later. Patterns emerged. The fires always destroyed records, birth ledgers, baptism papers, names that should have lived in history erased in ash. It was as if someone, or something, was cleansing the traces of Eleanor's children. Locals began to speak of the children of silence, descendants who carried no family name but left only ruin behind. By 1910, entire towns avoided the subject, yet the smoke lingered in memory, carrying with it the scent of burnt hymns. The pact had slipped the plantation. It was spreading. In 1911, 7 seminarians from New Orleans took it upon themselves to investigate the Harlan ruins. They believed the whispers of liturgical inversion were a test of faith, a chance to disprove heresy through exposure. Only one returned. His name was Father Duval, though parish records later listed him as incomplete. When found, he was barefoot, his cassock torn. He spoke only a single phrase: "The vessel is the key." Within months, his health deteriorated. He clawed at his own eyes, screaming that he saw children surrounding his bed, their mouths moving though no words emerged. By 1912, he was dead. The other 6 were never found. The church sealed the report, declaring the mission lost to the floodwaters. But locals knew better. The woods around the Harlan estate grew eerily still. Hunters stopped venturing near, claiming the trees themselves leaned inward. Listening, when asked why the search parties ceased, a sheriff said, "We don't go looking for graves that dig themselves." The seminary's silence became permanent. Their archives remain empty, a space where knowledge should be but never will be. By 1925, the Harlan name was deliberately struck from county records. Courthouse files show deeds transferred to shadow buyers, genealogies cut off mid-branch. Newspaper archives from the 19th century carry blank spaces where the Harlan name should be. Entire columns blacked out, but one image survives, a faded photograph found in a collapsed barn. It shows Eleanor unsmiling, her eyes pale and distant. Behind her, indistinct shapes, 7 blurred figures too tall, their faces unfocused, as if the camera could not hold them. Historians dismiss the photo as damaged film. Locals know better. They say the figures were watching, waiting. The erasure was not to protect the family's honor. It was to protect everyone else. A dynasty undone by its own hunger, its curse scattering across generations. But even in silence, blood remembers. In nearby towns, children continued to be born with storm-gray eyes. Their families buried them quickly, refusing to speak their names. By the 1930s, the whispers had grown. Some families end. Some should never begin. The Harlans were gone. But their secret remained, hidden, suppressed, erased, but not destroyed. By the 1930s, neighboring towns had developed their own taboos around the ruins of the Harlan estate. Children were warned never to wander there. Hunters skirted wide circles around the property, muttering about the hush. The hush was not silence, it was pressure. A heaviness in the chest, a constriction in the throat, as if the land itself forbade speech. Men who entered alone described losing track of time, returning with hours missing. One hunter insisted he saw circles of bones arranged beneath trees, skulls positioned to face east. When he returned the next day with others, the ground was bare, undisturbed. Locals whispered of gray-eyed figures glimpsed at twilight, barefoot, unmoving. Farmers swore they saw them standing in rows at the edges of fields, disappearing when approached. But no one ever dared to pursue. The town's silence became institutional. Teachers omitted the name Harlan. Preachers warned against speaking of the corrupted womb. Even sheriffs discouraged reports, saying we don't write down what should stay unspoken. Fear was no longer of the family, it was of the land itself. Every decade or so, a child was born with Eleanor's gray eyes, some in black families, others in poor white households, a scattering across counties like seeds cast by wind. Doctors noted seizures, fevers, uncanny strength. Many did not survive infancy. Those who did often spoke of voices in the fields, claiming they heard songs at night no one else could. A girl in 1929 began humming in her sleep, a low tune identical to Eleanor's diary notations. Her family burned her crib, fled the state, leaving her behind. She disappeared within weeks. A boy in 1933 was found carving circles into church pews with his fingernails. He said he was making seats for the 7. His parents begged the priest to exorcise him. Days later, the boy was gone, his bed empty. Mud smeared across the floorboards. Locals came to call them the Greyborn. They were not considered children but omens, reminders that the pact had never ended. They arrived without lineage, without explanation, and they vanished as swiftly as they came. Every sighting reignited old fears. The land had devoured the Harlans, but the blood had not died. In 1942, construction workers clearing forest near the old plantation uncovered a hidden stairwell beneath collapsed earth. It led to a stone chamber, an underground chapel. The air was heavy, damp with the stench of rust and mildew. Inside, pews were carved not with crosses but with shackles, each armrest shaped like manacles. At the altar, a single iron collar rested, larger than any made for man. Its interior was scratched with grooves, as if worn by something desperate to escape. Symbols lined the walls, resembling reversed crucifixes and broken circles. Workers claimed the chamber vibrated with sound too low to hear, felt only in the chest. One man fainted. Another ran into the woods, never returning. Authorities sealed the chapel within days, declaring it unsafe. No official photographs exist, but rumors spread among the workers' families that the collar was not placed upon a man or woman, but upon something born from the vessel. The chapel was buried again, marked as swampland. Yet even today, locals claim the ground above it never grows grass, no matter the season. Among the relics salvaged from the Harlan estate was a trunk locked and hidden for decades in a university archive. When opened, it contained Eleanor's diary, smeared with ash, its ink trembling across the page. At first, her words describe confusion, dreams of children calling her name, visions of rivers flooding with gray-eyed faces. She writes of humming songs she does not know, songs that seem to know her instead. Her entries darken. She speaks of Ambrose's pact, of her body as the soil into which 7 seeds were sown. She writes, "They are not his anymore. They come to me, they kneel, and I rise." In her final entry, dated weeks before her disappearance, the handwriting changes. The letters slant, words doubling back upon themselves. "I am vessel." Vessel is key. "Death does not bind me. Flesh binds me. Flesh sings." The trunk was resealed, labeled unfit for study. The diary remains under lock, its pages too fragile for handling. But its final line has been transcribed in whispers, passed like a contagion. "They are not his slaves anymore. They are mine. I am theirs." In the late 1940s, psychologists studying generational trauma stumbled upon the fragments of the Harlan legend. They theorized the pact was not supernatural, but a deliberate program of ritualized breeding meant to fracture identity, breaking minds across generations. One report suggested the children's seizures and humming were expressions of split consciousness, evidence of trauma so deep it rewrote memory. But others in the team resisted. One researcher wrote, "The patterns are too exact. The silence is too uniform. Something is orchestrating beyond psychology." The lead psychologist presented his findings at a private conference in New Orleans. He described Eleanor's diary as a blueprint for recursive identity, claiming her words reflected not madness, but instruction. He concluded with a chilling phrase, "The vessel remains." The pact repeats. Within a year he was dead, hanging in his office, a circle carved into the floor beneath his chair. His colleagues denied the existence of the report. The conference notes were suppressed. Whispers claimed he had begun hearing humming at night, that he spoke of children standing outside his window, staring upward, waiting. The psychology of the pact could not contain its hunger. It seeped beyond theory, back into silence. In 1950, a fire erupted in the county's regional archive. Flames devoured shelves of parish registers, court transcripts, and private ledgers, including the last known documents of the Harlan family. Officials cited faulty wiring, yet firefighters swore the blaze moved too quickly, consuming stone-walled rooms that should never have burned. One fireman reported hearing chanting from within the inferno, low, rhythmic voices, impossible to mistake. Another refused to enter, claiming unseen hands shoved him back as he approached. His captain dismissed the account, but the man never fought fire again. Witnesses outside described sparks forming circles in the sky, 7 orbs rising above the smoke. When the flames finally died, the Harlan papers were ash. Only one fragment remained, the corner of a page with the word "vessel" scrawled in ink. The official report closed the case, But locals knew. The fire was not accident. It was erasure. The land itself had no more patience for paper, no more tolerance for memory. The pact had devoured record, testimony, archive. History was silenced by fire. Yet fragments remain: diaries, photographs, whispered testimony, smudged letters from priests and soldiers. When pieced together, a pattern emerges. 7 enslaved men, a wife-turned vessel, children with storm-gray eyes repeating words older than language itself. It is not lineage, but recursion. History feeding itself, repeating its song through different mouths, different generations. A cycle forged by hunger, not accident. The Colonel sought immortality not through bloodlines, but through corruption of the womb, bending birth into ritual. The suppression, the fires, the silence, all point to one truth. Institutions knew. Churches, courts, universities all turned away, burying fragments beneath bureaucracy. Not to protect the Harlans, but to protect themselves. For to acknowledge the pact was to acknowledge failure, that corruption did not come from demons, but from man himself. What the Colonel unleashed was not ghost, nor curse, but hunger. Hunger that learned to wear children's eyes. Hunger that hums in voices not its own. The pattern cannot be dismissed. It waits, even now. The land where the Harlan estate stood is empty, overgrown. No homes built, no crops planted. Developers purchase deeds only to sell them back, claiming financial collapse. Signs vanish from the roadside. Maps mislabel the area. It is as if geography itself conspires to erase the place. Locals call it the gray hush. Ask too directly and faces close. Voices lower. We don't talk about that ground. Hunters still claim the woods lean inward. Travelers report static on radios, words hidden in static. Vessel, key. Gray-eyed children are still born. Hospitals record them as anomalies, file them under genetic error. Yet nurses whisper. Families move away, abandon homes. Cemeteries bear small unmarked mounds. The silence is not forgetfulness. It is ritual, a pact of omission, an inherited fear. Entire counties collude in unspoken agreement. Do not speak the name, do not write it, do not let it live again. But silence cannot bind forever. Every few decades, rumors spread of gatherings at the ruins. Always in circles of 7, always beneath the moon. Witnesses describe humming, low, female, impossibly distant yet pressing close. Some swear they see a woman in white, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes gray as water. She does not walk. She drifts, no recordings capture the sound. Microphones cut out, cameras blur. But those present describe their own mouths moving without consent, their own voices joining the hum. In 1971, traveler claimed he saw 7 children kneeling before a woman, their heads bowed. When he blinked, the children were gone and the woman stood alone, smiling with a mouth too wide. He left the state the next morning, never to return. The gatherings are never interrupted. Those who try vanish. Police reports are buried, filed as lost persons. Families grieve without answers. The vessel has not died. She waits, she multiplies, she hums. So what was the pact the Colonel made when he gave his wife to 7 enslaved men? Was it arrogance seeking dominion over death? Or was it something older? A ritual whispered long before America was born, hidden in the language of chains and silence. We may never know. The Harlan dynasty ended in ruin, its name erased, its lands left barren. Yet the legacy remains, not in documents or monuments, but in the eyes of children, in fires that cleanse archives, in humming that crawls through the marrow of night. Eleanor's final diary line speaks louder than any history book. The womb is the vessel. The vessel is the key. Through me, we break the chain of death. This is not folklore, not a ghost story. It is the memory of a pact America buried, a hunger it pretends never lived. But silence is not salvation. Silence is invitation fade to black. A woman's hum echoes, faint but rising.